How can we combat the fight against fentanyl? There are two weapons: education and prevention. Stay tuned. Welcome to episode 3 of Fentanyl, the fentanyl crisis close to home. We're so delighted that you have joined us again today. And Dr. Sankey, thank you for again being on set with us.
I'm so happy to be here. This is such a relevant topic. Our nation, our communities, our churches are being affected by this fentanyl crisis. So again, thank you for having me.
And today we're going to address two areas that are very close cousins in this fight against fentanyl and really other drugs as well. But one of those subjects is education. But prevention is also a close cousin of education. So when we talk about education, drug education, we hear the terminology a lot, drug education. What do we really mean when we say drug education? Because this is one of the weapons to fight the fentanyl crisis.
Well, I do know that it's important to have information. That's how education occurs. And the information has to be very credible information. We learned in segment 1 that fentanyl can be in a pill form, a liquid form. We learned that it's even rainbow fentanyl, different colors. So having the accurate information about this drug is critical as we talk about how to reduce or even prevent its use. Also when you know the information, you want to know what are the effects. We learned that it causes a euphoric effect. People feel relaxed. They actually can escape reality. So that's all a part of the education of knowing the effects and then moving on to the risk. What are those risk factors? If I take it, what may happen? If I think it's one dose and it's another dose, am I going to overdose? Am I at risk of becoming addicted and possibly overdosing? And so again, knowing the information about it, the effects, the risk, and literally the potential harm or danger of it. That's really what education does.
So education and drug education provides a lot of knowledge. It provides knowledge that is very much needed. This country many years ago launched something that was called the War on Drugs.
Yes.
And part of this war on drugs has to do with education as well, not just enforcement from a law perspective, but we have gone into our school systems and tried to educate our children with the DARE program. But when we talk about education, really education for drugs begins in the home with the parents. Don't you think so?
I do believe that, Pastor Hall, but what I do know is many of us are not educated about the drugs that are happening. We kind of live in a bubble, we really do. Parents go and come to work, go to and from work, to and from church, to and from different activities. But really, it wasn't until I started researching this topic of fentanyl that I learned more about it. As I mentioned before, we used it in surgery, but I had no need to research it from in the context of it being a drug with addiction and how it's affecting people. So I believe it starts in the home, as you mentioned, but I believe this is why we're having this conversation, because many people are unaware of really the effects of fentanyl.
So if a child does not get education about how to stay off of this terrible stuff that we call fentanyl and even other drugs as well, if they cannot get it from home, then where can they find information on helping to stay off of this drug that we call fentanyl?
Really good question. What I do know is that in our schools is our biggest opportunity because students spend a lot of time there. There's where the peer pressure occurs, sometimes even the bullying or the experimenting in the bathroom or different places across the campus. I remember that DARE program that you talked about. It was like, just say no, but we don't really hear that anymore.
Right.
And it's more than saying no. It's saying no because you really realize the harm and the dangers of it.
Absolutely.
So again, in the home is a good starting place. Our kids have just started back to school. Our schools are another place that we really should really be focused on and engaging our teachers, our principals in understanding how harmful not only fentanyl but any other drug, whether it's alcohol or tobacco or marijuana. So I think that this conversation is really even broader than fentanyl, but in the home is a good starting point, in the church, in the schools, those are our good starting points.
So let me talk about our churches, because we've said a lot about churches. So we've talked about the family, that the ideal location to get information on fighting against these terrible drugs would start in the home. But as you said, in many cases, the parents themselves are not well educated in this area of drug education. So we do have schools, and there are schools that bring in professionals that can help better educate our children. But there's some other things that I believe that a church can do, or churches coming together. There can be, for example, a very special day that's set aside where churches can invite counselors and drug therapists to come in, and they can have a full day of addressing the dangers of starting drug use or continuing drug use for those that might still be on drugs. So the church should have some kind of relationship in the community, don't you think, that will help, again, better educate as far as the home and the school, where they work together as a partnership with the school and with the home?
You know, Pastor Hall, you bring up a very good point. Collaboration is really important with education. One person doesn't have all the knowledge. There's many
Absolutely.
resources that are out there. But I do see where in the home and the church where we can start is with peer pressure. Teaching individuals how to cope with peer pressure, how to say no, how to stand their ground, if you will, and not be drawn into. So those are behaviors that can be taught at home and should be reinforced at home, meaning that telling the child that they have value, giving them positive feedback. All of those are part of the educational process because kids are just, there's a tendency to want to know. There's a tendency to not want to be left out. And so again, I think, you know, part of that collaboration with the community of bringing them into to educate would be that ongoing reinforcement of value, affirming young people when they're doing well, when they have stressful. Some kids, let me tell you, they're so used to making all A's. If they get a B, they're going to have a, you know, they have a difficulty coping with that. Or if they make a C, or they may feel bad if I take this home to my parent, you know, what are they going to say? And all of those are real feelings that young people have that could lead to them trying to escape from the reality of, I didn't do as well as I thought I should.
And I believe there are also other various organizations within our communities that really committed to fighting against these terrible drugs, that they do a lot of outreach, good outreach in the community. I remember some years ago, I was in South Florida as one of the pastors of a 2-church district, and the police department for our city, they had at the city hall a meeting, an outreach for the community, where one of their officers was able to explain the various kinds of drugs and what drug dealers and others now in these laboratories are doing to manipulate these drugs. You used to say marijuana was a simple drug, but not anymore, because they've done so much stuff with all of these synthetic drugs that when a drug user begins to take this stuff, they really don't know what they're putting into their body now. But there was an outreach from our police department. I believe also the Department of Drug Enforcement, they do things with families. And they have these outings in communities and these gatherings where families are able to come together. And there's that educational component as well. So there's a number of things as far as drug education that can be done in our community.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Pastor Hall. Let me tell you why, because I do know it takes intentionality. And it's not just a one day, you know, once a year drug program at the church or in the community. It's really an ongoing support system for young people, for older people too. Sometimes the older people are struggling with this habit as well. And as I mentioned before, there's many times the doctors will order fentanyl as a drug for severe pain or after surgery. And having those pills sitting in different places throughout the house because you're thinking they're mine that's one way we need to educate our, even those that are using it legally. Educate them that you can't leave it unattended. That's something that needs to be safeguarded. So that's also part of the education. But part of the education is once we recognize that there's someone that's using it, early intervention, the earlier the better. Because when you delay, it begins a habit that gets reinforced in the brain and the body, and then that really is, that's harmful, dangerous, puts them at risk for overdosing. And so that would be part of the education as well, but it's really that intentional focus and say, once a quarter, once every other month in our churches and our schools, we're gonna talk out loud about addiction. And it could be any addiction that someone may have. And the reason we're having that conversation, we wanna save lives.
So what I'm really hearing you say here, Doc, is that there needs to clearly be a partnership between the various entities within our community. No one entity can address this problem by itself, but clearly the family entity, our churches, our schools, our law enforcement agency, I think all of them coming together to combat this terrible problem that we have in our society right now as far as this fentanyl crisis and the other drugs that help to take so many lives every year as well. So that there needs to be that partnership. So let me ask you a question. How can a partnership be formed to help educate our children? Because I use children because children now are experimenting with drugs at a much younger age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what we're finding, not only they're experimenting with drugs, they're experiencing a lot of stress. And so, and they're more at risk to take their lives even at the age of 14. So we have to really be in tune, like you say, intentionally forming the partnerships. There are just numerous organizations who have started as a result of maybe losing a child to, an overdose.
Right.
Or losing a child to, suicide. And there's numerous organizations out there, and many people are eager to really partner with, whether it's a church organization or a community organization, to talk about how to educate with the intention and the aim to prevent any type of addiction, because that's really what we're talking about. We want to prevent addiction, and so we do that through education. We do that through support, and sometimes just having a buddy system, because there are many children that may be brought up in a single parent home. If the parent's working and the child is at home, we don't know what they're doing. And we want parents to know that there's support out there in our community. So I would start by going to the internet. Is a great resource to just put in their Google and support systems. That's a great starting point to form partnerships. And I would add to that, churches to churches. If I'm doing something at my church, let the news get out. Spread the news, advertise it broadly to everyone.
Very good
and
point.
Those can really come in partnerships with churches. And they could be Seventh-day Adventist churches, or they may be non-Seventh-day Adventist churches. But people are concerned about this fentanyl addiction crisis. I mean, we'll talk about it later, but even the government has signed a bill. So we want to make sure that we are on the front line and that we're not ignoring and that we're paying attention, that this is a real problem affecting real people, and it's very dangerous.
So this education piece in combating this terrible scourge that we have called fentanyl, it is a key component in the fight against fentanyl, because education is a key component, because without education, a person might not really know what this drug is all about and how dangerous it can be. But knowledge itself can help us really in combating this huge problem that we have right now that's still inundating our country. There are too many that are still dying from fentanyl.
That's exactly right. The overdose rate is rising. And I believe that is partly in part because we have not done enough education in some areas. So I would think that education, if I were to envision what the education looks like, it is what is the drug? What does it do? What are the side effects? You know, what are those side and what are the consequences? And we'll talk more about what happens with those consequences because not only can someone lose their life, but many times they have other losses, losses of jobs and homes and cars, reputation. So again, as we talk about education and the importance and the value of it, we have to be real in saying, what are we going to talk about? The effects, the risks, the consequences, the harm. So that students, simple messages that people can understand and that can be transferable, you know, to churches and communities. So again, I think as we, you know, kind of come up on our ending this conversation about education, you know, we're going to talk more about prevention. We're going to talk about why that is so important. Why is it so important to prevent? It's important to educate, but just because you know about something doesn't mean you're not going to do something. We know that.
Right.
Yes.
So knowledge alone is not enough. We have to go a step further.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about some of those strategies for prevention. And our, you know, as we come up to our next segment, I would tell people to stay tuned.
All right.
There's going to be a lot of information. We're going to talk about prevention, and we want just to come back. We have more to tell you that we believe is going to be valuable for you as we're on this journey to face and fight and combat the fentanyl addiction crisis. So welcome back to Facing the Fentanyl Addiction Crisis. In our first segment, we talked about education, the importance that education can do in combating this crisis. What we learned is that fentanyl, when we educate on the effects, the risk, and also the harm, that it is effective. We can educate in our schools, in our churches, in our community, and we stressed about the importance of collaboration. In this segment, we're going to talk more about prevention. So welcome back, Pastor Hall. We're glad that you're here. We're going to talk about prevention as part of combating the fentanyl addiction crisis.
Yeah, you know, prevention is really the first cousin to education. As we talk about education, that's knowledge. But prevention seeks to delay or stop the use of drugs, even if an individual is already using drugs. So prevention is something very powerful, and it is a very powerful weapon in this fight against the fentanyl crisis. One of the things that when we talk about prevention, prevention goes beyond just education. So you might say that prevention is kind of education with work clothes on, with the work gloves and the work boots on, to really look at attacking this problem that we have dealing with fentanyl. So it aims to identify not only the drug use if a person is already using drugs, but to try to help steer them away from that drugs or drugs if they're already using drugs. So prevention is something that is very critical in this fight against drugs.
You know what comes to my mind real quick, sorry to interrupt you. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Right.
So this is what we're talking about. If we can prevent someone from even starting using it, it really will be a success.
Absolutely.
So I like what you're saying.
Yeah. And there's so many things when we start talking about prevention that we need to look at that oftentimes we don't often think about until a person is almost on their last leg with this drug that's so terrible that it's taken their health, and in some cases it's taken their life. And then we look back and say, well, why didn't we think of maybe looking at some of these various areas to help? But think about, for example, the family unit. the family unit is very critical in this fight in terms of prevention against drugs. We talked about in our earlier segment that some moms and dads are not really familiar or have an educational background per se on how to address the topic of drugs. But let's dig deeper. In some homes, the dad is absent, so you have an absentee dad. In some homes, you have an absentee mother,
That's right.
where mom is not at home either. So you have a single parent that's raising a child or children by themselves. So that becomes a situation that has to be mitigated. Well, how do we mitigate that? Well, we have to give that family some support. And this is where we talk about the various partnerships that we talked about earlier, where if there is a church connection, then we are able to help connect that child within the church community. Now, if they're unchurched, then there are other entities that we can look at to help still give the support to the family that's needed. There's another area that we look at when we talk about prevention, and that is this one word called poverty. There are so many families that grow up in poverty. And so if you're going to prevent a child from getting caught up in drugs, because some drug users start with becoming drug pushers. That happens sometimes when a drug dealer might say even to a child, hey, you want to make $50? Why don't you run this package over across town and I'll give you $50, I'll give you $75, I'll give you $100. For some children, $50, $75, $100, that's a lot of money. So we want to prevent certain kinds of temptation to children. This whole poverty thing, we want to make sure that we work with them so that they maybe have like little jobs. That can be these summer jobs. There can be other jobs that they can do. Their work study programs or job programs that they can do. That helps put a little money in their pocket. And by doing that, it helps kind of push them away from sometimes the temptation of drug dealers to try to put an extra dollar or so in their pocket as well.
You know, you bring up a very good point that there are some homes when there's a single parent raising children. Not only are the children at risk for addiction, but the parent.
Absolutely.
Because if the parent is under high levels of stress to raise little people or teenagers, you know, again, peer pressure occurs with adults. And they may say, man, just come on, let's give you a little bit of, you know, this or that to help you to cope with raising these children.
Right.
So I think as a church and as a community, identifying when we know that the family structure is fragile, that how do we provide support to the, whether it's in the church, we recognize when we see a single parent raising a child, you know, and it may on the outside look like it's all is well.
Right. Right.
But it may not all be well. And children may not blow the whistle on a parent and say, my parent's using drugs, you know. But so I think it really is this education and prevention that we're talking about is a two-way street. For children to recognize if their parents are users and to recognize parents if their child is a user. And you're correct, poverty does play a very important role. When there's conflict in the home, that plays a very important role. And so those are things that when we recognize them, putting support structures around almost like a, you know, a guard, a fence.
Absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
To protect them from the temptation, from the desire, from the tendency to want to do that. And so that's very important because those strong family relationships reduce the risk of someone actually beginning to use fentanyl or any other type of drug.
And I love the fact that you talk about putting up certain guardrails to help guard our children. Talk to me about some of the various organizations that are in our communities. I want to mention Pathfinder. There are some others. What other entities that are in our communities that our children can get involved in that can help them, that can help really prevent them from getting on drugs? Absolutely.
And I think we should think about our ministries that we have in our churches. We have a lot of good ministries, and when we want to think about not only Pathfinders, but beginning to mentor young people into health ministries, into publishing like you do. You know, you bring the students down and they go and sell the books. So as they're selling them, that's one way to reinforce the importance of healthy living, avoiding drugs, avoiding use of alcohol and tobacco. So in our churches, and sometimes there's youth elders.
Right.
So I think we have to look within the church and say, how do we get young people and even all the members involved to a point that they feel valued, that they feel that strong support, so that their support and their strength and their well-being comes from helping and involvement versus maybe using something to escape.
So you're talking opportunity here.
Absolutely.
Many times drug addiction begins to happen because of lack of opportunity. But you're talking about now giving young people an opportunity, and even children an opportunity to get involved in a lot of things, which leads me to another area. One of the areas that causes perhaps drug addiction and drug use is this area called family conflict. The strengthening, I think, of the family is very critical. It is very critical, because if you have a disjointed family, then you have the enemy that is able to come in and to manipulate the children, and in some cases even manipulate the parents as well. So this whole thing of family conflict, we have to encourage families, even intact families, to constantly seek to go to like family retreats or other various things that are happening, even within your church. They sometimes have these family life weekends, and it talks about how the family can remain strong. Because if you have a strong family structure and that foundation is there, then you can help build strong children. And if the family situation is weak, then it helps weaken our children. And sometimes what happens is there's that peer pressure that comes in. You have gangbangers and you have drug dealers. They're always trying to gain access to our children. But if you got a strong family unit, then it becomes a lot more difficult for that to happen.
You know, when we were growing up, we had family worship in the morning. My father, he left home early because he had to get to work early. So he would wake us up at 4 in the morning so that we could have worship before he left home. He never left home without having worship.
It's amazing.
To cover the children. We had meals together. When he came on, we would have breakfast together with my mom. And then in the evening, we had our meals together as a family. And so those are opportunities for the parents to see their children, you know, to teach their children about God, to teach their children about their accountability of their body being the temple of God, and that whatever we eat or drink or do, that we do all to the glory of God. So again, I think for parents, this thing about prevention are things that we can do, or simple things. Worship together, praying together before your child leaves home, having meals together. It may not be every meal, but at least, you know, a couple of times a week, set aside that we're going to have meals together. I'm going to ask you, how was your day? I'm going to ask you certain questions, and so they know that's going to be asked. And that way you build a relationship with your child. So if they're tempted, they can say, you know what happened to me at school today? And they can feel comfortable sharing it without being criticized that they did anything wrong to bring it on themselves. So part of that prevention is really strategically, again, safeguarding the home in such a way that the child feels that home is a safe place to talk out loud about what they see. And
That's critical.
And what's been brought to them, so that they can feel comfortable that they can do that. So that opportunity would begin in the home. And I don't know how many families still do that, but I would encourage, whether it's you have little children or adult children or teenagers, or maybe just a husband and wife in the home, you know, worship together works. We know it works.
Absolutely.
We know
Absolutely.
it works.
And I love something else you're saying, eating a meal together as a family.
That's right.
And I'm wondering, you know, how many of those who are viewing, how many still really sit down and eat a meal? Sometimes we are so busy working and doing good things that we don't sit down to really eat a meal there's something powerful in sitting down and eating a meal and fellowshipping. And it means, Dr. Sankey, that when we sit down to eat, it means those phones are turned off. It means the phones are not at the table. So we can definitely enjoy one-on-one conversation with each other where we talk as a family. And by doing that, as you said, if there's a problem that that child has faced during the day, they will feel comfortable in really talking about that, which is something very critical. What about addressing support services? That's another area of prevention. There are some communities that it is very difficult to get the various support services that they need. Talk to me a little bit about how can families get the support that they need with support services in our communities. There's some that have all kinds of problems and they don't know where to turn to get the help.
You know, that's a really good question. Pastor Hall, when I think about support systems, as I mentioned, there are some that you can find online. We have, sometimes the support system may not only be just for the addiction, it may be for other issues that they have, that they need a counselor.
Right.
Fortunately, we have Christian counselors.
Absolutely.
You know, we have the Abide Network, is a bunch of Christian counselors who we can, you know, tap into. I do know that we also have, as I mentioned, Journey to Wholeness.
Right, right.
And that's why I believe it's critical that churches begin to think about how to expand their ministry to include addiction recovery. Because if it's at the church and you're used to coming to the church, that's a familiar place. So there's numerous resources. It just depends on where you live.
Right.
You know, you can put in your zip code. It will actually lead you to all the different resources that are there. Some are free, no cost.
Absolutely.
There's others that may be of cost. And so I think that prevention is not only looking for resources outside, but I think there's like about 10 different ways that I've seen online that you can actually help prevent drug abuse. Not only educating, but healthy coping. How do you learn to cope with the stressors of life? Scripture's good, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Absolutely.
You know, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. There's many things that we can do to help learn coping skills. I think that's critical.
Right.
And just, you know, very strong relationships. When we were growing up, our parents knew who our friends were. Yeah, and there were some people, my dad said, you know what, I prefer you not associate with them because of, you know, behaviors they saw.
Absolutely.
So again, you know, parents taking that involvement, I can't stress that enough, about healthy relationships. And so that's 3 of the things that I know that I've seen online about for prevention.
I discovered also living a healthy, balanced life in terms of having a proper diet and exercise and sleep. All of those things help lead you to making sure that you take care of your body and you don't put anything into your body that's going to damage the body, because these bodies of ours are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and we want to make absolutely sure that we honor these bodies that God has given to us. We have one body as we go through this earth, and we need to do our best to take care of that. So those who really focus on taking care of their body, the chances of them putting all of this garbage into their system that we call fentanyl is a lot less. Yeah.
You know, one of the Bible verses that comes to mind is resist the devil, he will flee from you. And so what we've been talking about in this segment is prevention, resisting the devil, resisting the temptation of fentanyl use. Why? It's because we know that our bodies are the temple of God. You know, why? Because we don't want to suffer the consequences of possibly overdose or even death, as we talked about before. And so what we've talked about is prevention, and how when we prevent the use of any type of drug, specifically fentanyl as we're talking about, how we honor God. How we honor God with our bodies. So again, I would say thank you all so much for joining us for this segment on prevention. It's been one that has been a little difficult to talk about because it's easy to talk about education, but everyone has a choice that they must make of whether they will resist the temptation, resist actually taking the drug, and resist being involved with an addiction. So again, thank you for joining us for facing the fentanyl addiction crisis. It's our hope and our prayer that you've learned one thing that you can share with someone else, and that you will join us for future episodes of this.